Sweet. Well, cheers, Richard, for doing the interview.
Cool.
Yeah, I think I just asked you before we started recording the thing, but how are things at New Zealand Musician?
Oh, it's a very hard time for New Zealand Musician, as it is for pretty much every print outlet, be it newspaper or magazine. And similarly, it's all part and parcel of the current decline of the music economy in terms of revenue streams.
Yeah. Okay. And how are you kind of combating that, or working your way through it?
Well,
I suppose you're just taking each angle as it comes, really.
Like a lot of aspects of the music industry, we've had to accept that your income stream increasingly needs to be made up of rats and mice kind of income, bits and pieces here and there, rather than your major flow, like, i.e. for artists used to be CD sales, and now it's a collection of other bits and pieces and things, rather than that. And similar for us, we've had to trim costs, which was very hard to do, and also accept a reduced income overall.
So have you found any? I mean, obviously those are some sides that are a pain in the butt.
Yep.
But have you found that from that you've had to come up with some creative ideas, or kind of?
To be candid,
are there any positives?
To be candid, no. I would say there's no
No.
positives at all. Not for me. But New Zealand Musician would be unusual in the regard that it's been in a declining environment for a long time, and at no stage in its life has it been, a cash cow or a cash rich situation. So it's always been run lean to survive, and it's always been run with a wider social service context to it than a corporate business model.
Yeah.
And as such, there hasn't been any fat on the bone to be trimmed for close on a decade.
Yeah. Has been very successful in that social respect, though.
I believe so.
It's done its
Thank you.
job. It can be hard for musos to get in touch with you as a mag if they don't know where to go, or if they're starting out. So how would you suggest someone that, say, wants to be featured in the mag or has something to say, what's the best way to get in touch?
These days, inevitably, it's by email, obviously those addresses are available widely, both online and in the magazine. And then, we will respond to pitches as we see fit. It used to be that picking up the phone was the way to do it, but I think email is definitely the way now.
Yeah. And it is a simple question, but you'd be surprised, sometimes with the musos starting out, you'd think, well, you just look for the number and call it, but sometimes they just don't know. They don't have an idea.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of from where I sit, there's a lot of laziness and worldly naivety in that example. I.e., we produce a magazine which is free. It's called New Zealand Musician. It's aimed at musicians. It's available at music stores across the country. If people buy strings, instruments, recorded music, paper music, then they brush up against this free title. They can't not brush up against it.
Yeah.
If they choose not to pick it up, I've got no problem with that. But they certainly can't complain that it's hard to get hold of.
Yeah.
And therefore that we are hard to get hold of.
Yeah. And do you find that's a common thing with musicians, is the kind of shouting at all these the bodies that do work for New Zealand musos? So, for example, say with a funding body, and something that was quite interesting was at the last MMF meeting, seminar, and they said there was a comment along the lines of, well, if I don't get funded, what am I going to do? And do you find that amongst musicians? Is that
absolutely
kind of there? And
absolutely, and I don't, this is my realm, so I can't tell you whether it's a wider phenomenon in our society or globally. But certainly amongst musicians there is a surprising amount of, I've already used the word laziness, but expectancy, and a reluctance to do any research that would be personally beneficial to the researcher. So not only is there an expectation of some sort of handout in terms of funding based on minimal effort, but there's an expectation that the information will be dropped in their laps without any effort to access that information, and that of course is a nonsense in anybody's world.
Yeah, I think what I've found is that it's a feeling that on both sides of the industry there's a certain amount of shooting themselves in the foot. For me, I feel that New Zealand radio it's great and it is really good, but there's also this thing of it can feel a bit clicky trying to get on. It is quite hard to get on radio if you don't know the right people or have exactly the right sound for the station. Now, even though that's you're not dealing with a radio station here, that's just an example of how I feel it's on both sides.
Sure, sure. But what what the artist is ignoring in that scenario is the intersection of art and commerce, I guess, and a radio station, even a free magazine, and even a funding agency are commercial entities. They are entities that either earn money by providing their services, or in the case of a funding agency, are responsible to the government at the end of the day, but responsible to higher powers in regard to how they disseminate and distribute that money. And so, as you go up the chain, levels of responsibility are higher and higher, and radio people must realise that although radio looks glamorous, it's fallen on hard times as well, and there are fewer and fewer people doing the range of jobs, therefore people are working harder. There are increasing expectations of profit, and which equals listenership, to be driven out of any radio station.
Yeah, and that comes back a bit too to what you were just saying previously about that certain amount of expectancy sometimes. I mean, and this is coming. I want to put things across for listeners in a real basic point of view, so it's easy to understand. When you run something like a free magazine, you're relying a lot on the advertising that you're getting, and I think some people, just general Joe Blogs reader, doesn't know too much about that side, and so even though you're doing this great service, and you're relying on that to a large extent to keep it going, they still sometimes expect things quite heavily of the magazine.
This I have found, and I believe you're right. And it's actually a curse of a free title, because when you can charge $10 a copy, people clearly have the choice of not spending that $10 and not picking it up, but they have an investment in it, having spent that money, and therefore are probably more likely to be accepting of the content, because they've invested in it themselves. And if you've spent $10 on buying a CD and you think it's crap, you kind of feel a bit embarrassed about telling your mates that you spent $10 and you bought some a nonsense.
It's a funny
music.
thing, eh?
But if you get it for free, then people are much more seem to find it easier to criticise it.
Yeah, yeah.
And that to be candid, that's reflected in the attitudes that are carried into the funding realm, because that is free money, and therefore, because they don't individually invest in the process of securing that, that free money's availability, they are much more prone to criticise it.
Mm. It's kind of, I suppose it's similar to what money is really. I mean, money really is just a bit of paper, but it's the value that someone puts with it. And so when it's got that, what would you call it, like a perception of value, everyone else goes on that chain. Whereas it's just a bit of paper really. And it's the same thing, even with a gig, like running a gig. I've put on that underground festival, and I've found similar things, and just with products, same thing, even with selling CDs, or providing, say, a tutoring service like guitar lessons. There's that thing where if you put them too cheap, people will start to think, well, it must be a good product or whatever. It's quite interesting how they work.
Or in our case, I'm sure that some people throughout the years have assumed that New Zealand musicians must be getting funding from some secret source that must have a tap into either government funding or a rich dad kind of scenario or something along those lines, and therefore that's why it sustains itself. But that's never been the case at all. It's entirely, as you observe, funded through advertising.
Yeah. Maybe you could switch that, take it as a compliment on the days when you're pissed off with it.
Yeah, sometimes you
do. Yeah. Is there anything, just back to the musos approaching you?
Yep.
Is there anything that they maybe do wrong or could do a bit better?
Yeah, again, and it's same word, expectation. The most typical mistake is a musician rightly having self-belief, but wrongly having an expectation that should lead to a result.
Yeah.
I don't deny musicians the need and the right to have or the right and the need to have self-belief, because otherwise you can't make art and you can't push yourself out there and get other people to hear it. But just because you think that you make good music, or your mum does, or your sister does, or your girlfriend does, certainly doesn't mean that other people do.
Yeah.
And certainly doesn't mean that your music can and will stand up side by side against somebody else's music.
Yeah.
In the same genre or in the same time period.
Yeah.
So, in essence, as with radio, and as with typically with any business where there is a choice, there are too many potential providers. In this case, too many artists with songs wanting to get access to too little real estate, paper. In my case, space in a retail fashion store. In the case of fashion, we are spoiled for choice. Therefore, we cherry pick amongst that choice.
Yeah.
And anybody that contacts us and assumes that because they've written a song that we will be interested in writing about it is well and truly out of line.
Yeah.
Because we're getting in the same day we might get some other people contacting us who are into their fifth album and have therefore written 500 songs.
Yeah.
And inevitably are doing a better job of it.
Yeah.
The person who's just written their first song.
Yeah, that's a very cool answer. It's very straightforward and easy for listeners to understand, I think, hopefully. And it's the same across the board with management and everything else. I know in New Zealand, artists can get pissed off because they think, well, why isn't this person managing me? I've worked hard for this long, blah, blah, blah. And the simple fact is that they're getting, hundreds of people coming up to them saying the same thing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Hard work doesn't always equal those results, but it will in the end, won't it, for musicians that are working hard anyway, if they persist and things like this. And,
one hopes,
Yeah.
There's certainly no guarantees because it is art. At the end of the day, and there's plenty of history tells us that some of our best artists, be they musicians or otherwise, weren't really recognised until
Van Gogh.
Dead and Gold.
Yeah.
Dead and Gone.
Yeah.
Sorry. Van Gogh being the obvious one, but musicians as well. So that aside, I think that there is a huge amount of naivety amongst recording artists in the assumption that what they have produced is of interest to other people, and there are some easy steps which they can take to test that theory, which too often they don't take, and the first one is clearly with friends, and then friends of friends, and then a gig if they're able to perform, or a wider test bed of listenership. Those who today produce a song or two in their home studio, which most musicians are able to do, and then fire it off to media or expect media to respond to that. Oftentimes, I'm sure, it's without having tested it anywhere, other than perhaps their mums, as I've said earlier. There's a lot of simple steps, and you'd have to say that any name band that's out there and you hear on the radio, they've gone through processes like that. They don't produce an album and set it out for sale without having first road tested songs, audience tested songs, peer tested songs, etc.
With a couple of pop exceptions, but I agree.
Absolutely, there are exceptions, and right, and as they should.
No, that's it's a good point, I think, for listeners to take on board, especially those that do play music. I think that it's easy for a musician to fill up a club, when they're straight out of school and they've got a lot of drinking buddies, and then think, well, this must be it, and then get angry or resentful at people in the industry that don't take them on.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
But it is important to remember what you were saying, about that.
Yeah, and in terms of anybody embracing you, be it as you say management or a record label or media embracing artists, all of us take more into account than simply the music. Personalities, the relevance of the genre, the musicianship, the execution, the live versus recorded issues, there are any number of things, the attitudes, so all those things get evaluated.
Yeah, and it's such a weird industry and culture, really, though, when you think about it, because it's mixing art with that commercial side, and it's even conflicting, I think, with the artists themselves of going, I want to do my own thing, I want to be underground, blah blah blah, and then going, we only sold 100 copies, and it's a bit of a paradox.
It is. Yeah, you're right, Ryan. It is almost, for most artists, it is.
Yeah.
And we, being Kiwis, tend to resent those artists who we think are producing music for money, and that's surely one of the major reasons why we've never been a strong pop music economy. We've never had a consistent flow of pop music creators, musicians, pop musicians, chart pop.
Pure pop stuff.
Pure pop.
Yeah.
I think a large chunk of that reason has to be our national psyche, which is fractionally resentful of people who appear to be doing something specifically to make money. Especially
do you find that tall poppy thing?
No, that's not tall poppy. That's
or no?
That's not tall poppy. That's that's allied, but it's not the same.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
So what I'm saying is as a nation, we don't like. Amongst artists, we don't. Amongst musicians, I don't think that we've ever embraced that showy Let's use hip hop as a metaphor, if you like, an example. Our successful hip hop artists have been faded jeans and hoodie wearers, as opposed to brand new suit and gold chain wearers.
Yeah.
Right? And when artists, as has happened, hip hop artists have endeavoured to come into the market with the brand new suit, the sharp shoes, the gold rings and the gold chains, they've been shot down pretty quickly. And I don't see that as tall poppy, I see that as just a national thing of favouring the underdog rather than the overlord.
Yeah.
Right? So in terms of tall poppy, I think in various stages of our lives now, our society, it does exist, and it's certainly allied. Most of us would harbour some sort of resentment at people that can charge $300 or $400 an hour and not provide much of a service for it.
Yeah.
When we're struggling to earn $300 or $400 a week.
Yeah. That puts really good focus on something, I believe, which is, or speaking of focus, a lot of it is what you focus on. So if you're trying to do whatever you're doing in this country, it doesn't matter if you're trying to be a doctor or a lawyer or a musician. If you focus on all the negatives, that's what you're going to see. If you focus on the positives, that's what you're going to see, to a large extent anyway. And they're both there.
Mm-hmm.
So however you choose to take part in it is up to you. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Statement?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And so
The reason I try and stress that too is for the people listening to the interview or reading the transcript later, is that I know from personal experience, if you sit there on your deck and drink a dozen, and dream of this and wonder why your music career is not taking off, and you're at your house on Saturday night instead of out getting off your butt or working towards what you should be working towards, the shit ain't going to happen for you.
Yeah.
And I think what confuses people, or what gets people that feeling of confusion, is that they desire it and they love it and they have the right intentions, but their actions don't match their intentions.
Yeah, nicely said. Yeah.
Have you seen a bit of that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And probably the most apparent examples through my working day would be bands that have a bit of a buzz going at a undergroundish level, maybe get signed to an independent label, and then you have the expectation that an EP or an album will flow fairly promptly, but often in those cases it doesn't, and the reason is that those bands have been riding on the buzz and haven't developed any application, any work ethic around their creating the art, and it's not until they're signed that the label realises that, and then has to educate them in the whole work ethic thing, i.e. discipline to songwriting. You've got 2 great songs, but we actually need 5 great songs to put onto an EP, etc., etc. And then we need you to be able to not only record them, but you need to be able to perform them live. So it's not okay just to bring in a string section and make them sound good because there's a string quartet on the recording. You've got to be able to reproduce it live in one way or another.
Yeah.
And those things are learnt. They're lessons that need to be learnt. But that would be certainly a good indicator. Something to say that has certainly we've experienced and see.
Yeah. The best art does need that substance, doesn't it? For the most part, anyway. There's always exceptions and plastic that gets sold, but
yeah. Oh, and the simple reality about art in this country, music in this country specifically, is the size of the population means that even if you were that one-hit wonder, you got it right first time, that's only going to deliver a certain amount of income, which is not going to be enough to buy you your house and set you up for the rest of your life. It's going to be an amount, and it might not even buy you a car. It probably won't. These days, it certainly won't. So so you need to have the next stage in your career.
Yeah, and that comes down to personal responsibility, not relying on managers and not relying on everyone else.
Well, just not expecting that having one aspect covered, i.e., thinking, assuming that one song will equate to interest and success, because it won't.
Yep. Cool. Makes total sense. So you've been involved with the mag since the fourth issue, I think it was?
Yes, correct.
Back in 88?
89.
89,
yeah.
And what got you into it? What started the whole thing for you?
Simply that it was a period in New Zealand, in global history, when post a share market crash, when economies had really dived and there was very few employment opportunities, and I was lucky enough to be offered the chance to help a fledgling magazine survive, really. And my personal interests in that was about music and New Zealand music, both which are subjects, even though I don't play subjects that I've always held very dear since I was. Well, I guess I grew up in a period when there was a lot of music, New Zealand music being played on the radio, so I never had any embarrassment factor about New Zealand music. I was always a believer. And once I was at university, I guess in particular, I was an avid live music consumer.
Yeah.
So this was an opportunity to become involved in something, one that was New Zealand, because I'd been overseas for several years and had just returned to the country, and that the idea of being involved in something that was specific to my country was appealing.
Yeah.
It was about music, which was even more appeling, and it had the opportunity, the artistic creative side of being a provider of a conduit of art.
And what vision did you have when you first started it?
Definitely the strength of belief in the validity and worth of New Zealand music, that and the knowledge that it wasn't being reflected in what we were hearing on radio and seeing on television in the country, i.e. that New Zealand music was in a bit of a fug and was being ignored largely.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're talking about the days which have subsequently been regularly referred to by NZ On Air, when local radio play was 2%, and that was the platform that they had to build on when they, or at least when the government introduced, which was some years later, but when the government introduced its quota imperative to national radio, it was on the basis, well, hey, you're only playing 2% of the music you're playing is New Zealand music. We want to hear you play more, and we're going to set 20% as the target. So I'm talking about a period when it was possibly even lower than 2%. It might have been as low as 1%.
Yeah. What's your opinions on that now? Do you think that it's I mean, it sounds like a stupid question. Do you think it's great where it is? I mean, it's obviously come up a long way since then. But what's your opinion on the general attitudes towards the amount of Kiwi music that's played at the moment? It's a little hard question because it's quite broad.
Yeah, it is. Yes, inevitably, that's right. And I don't listen to every radio station nor every musical genre.
Yeah.
I think that there is no doubt that local radio play is hugely beneficial to our music industry's economy. So, the more new Kiwi music that can be played on our radio, the better off our musicians and the whole music sector are. And I also happily extrapolate that to our society. It's better for our society that more New Zealand music is played within New Zealand. So, if it carried on up to 40 or 50%, I'd be happy. But I think that 20% was a sensible target and a realistic target, and we've dropped below that now. For the last several years it's been closer to 17%, and I think as much as I'd like to hear more, I think that's probably realistic, because again, it's commerce at the end of the day.
Yeah.
We are a small population in a big wide world, and there is no doubt that most of the best of the music is made overseas simply on a population and money basis. So it would be detrimental to us as a country not to be having access to the best of the American and the best of the French and the best of the British, European music being channeled through radio and television to us.
Yeah, you don't want to cut it off.
No.
And I mean, obviously, you've already pointed it out in your last a couple of the answers there, where you were saying that it is commerce. It's really important for people to remember. Kind of blurring over that commerce part. How do you feel about the music that is played on the mainstream channels? And this might be, you might say, well, it's not my area, so don't have too much opinion on it, which is fine. But do you feel that there is a good spread of New Zealand music being played, or do you feel that it could be a little more eclectic?
It's certainly not my area of expertise, because I don't listen to a lot of straight ahead commercial radio at all. But anecdotally and in my experience, I think probably the numbers are small, i.e. the number of artists and number of and spread of artists is narrower than I would like. But it's a lot better than it has been, and of course with the advantage now of internet being a driver for wider media interest, if a song genuinely is good and there's is available, then radio will pick up on it if it's being driven by social media or other internet
and
listenership.
That's probably a big point for listeners to realise, is that it kind of does need that backing or that push with the song, really, to be used on commercial radio. Not just, well, this is a great song, here's a great piece of art. But in saying that, I think musicians have to remember that Tommy Emmanuel is the most brilliant guitarist in the world, but he's not necessarily played on radio all over the place. Pantera might be a great heavy metal band. How many times do you hear them on the rock? So the way to succeed is not only just go for the instant, whatever you want to put on it of radio. I mean, you've got to look at what avenues and
very good. I see it.
You had a great interview on Kiwi FM. I thought it was really good for the 21st anniversary. And you said one of the early ideas of your, with Whammo, and you said one of your early ideas of bringing to the magazine was that you wanted to get a bit more diversity in the, or the open-mindedness to expand a little of different musicians. Have you felt that's come along? Well, let's talk about musicians first.
I do believe it has, and I would love to think the New Zealand musician was instrumental in its earlier days, but I think that the strength of New Zealand music, the core strength of New Zealand music in the last decade, has been the blending of musical types and musicians. So we have Fat Freddy's because someone thought it would be cool to have an electronic producer and a horn section.
Jamming. You're doing it, yeah.
And Fat Freddy's are out there doing it in the world, on the world scene, world stage.
Yeah.
And similarly, I think there's just a lot of examples, and more straight ahead. There's what Nathan Haynes did in the jazz scene. He was
very much so
considered a world leader.
Yeah.
People like Goldie.
Yeah.
Grabbing hold of him and wanting to be associated with him.
Yeah.
And it on a more micro scale, it happens at lots and lots of genres and genre and levels. So I think that if anything, it's a huge strength of our music scene. And so it's been successful. I really I like the concept of the adults, by way of example, which just sort of reinforces that there's a love and a respect amongst our musicians, and subsequently the audiences for the achievements of other artists.
Yeah.
And what that means in terms of proficiencies.
Yeah, I think people on both sides of the coin of the industry could take a big note from that last statement about having those good intentions, the good bonds, supporting each other, rather than being worried if you see someone else coming up. So, say for example, if someone else was doing a magazine, would it benefit you more to support them? Our true intentions, not because you're being some greasy,
sure.
And get the whole industry as a whole in New Zealand stronger, rather than trying to compete. So there's a great quote by Earl Nightingale. Instead of competing, all we have to do is create.
Yeah.
Do you think that? Well, you just said with the adults. I mean, there is that sense there of helping each other and creating with each other, rather than competing against each other and just killing it for ourselves.
Yeah. So, the inclusive model is a better one. What I've consistently observed about New Zealanders is this. I'm looking for the right word. Sorry, Ryan. Is that
right? I've been doing that the whole talk.
Is that people who have an idea head off to make that idea into a reality without thinking, where can I go to source some advice or some assistance with that idea? And so, tying it into our earlier conversation, a band might think, we're going to set up a band. What should we do about a band kitty? And one person knows that, one person runs his bank account efficiently, so he's given that job. But the band no one in the band says, let's look at New Zealand Musicians' website and see if there's anything about accounting for bands, or let's go to the library, or let's go online, or do whatever and see if we can find some information about this. And similarly, and if I may be candid to you, I suspect that you're guilty of this with your Guitars on Fire tour. I don't know, but in what I'm alluding to is that people come up with ideas, good ideas, but perhaps don't sort of take the fundamental time to look at what's around them and take advantage of what's already there.
Yeah.
They instead go and reinvent the wheel, or yeah, so personally, New Zealand musician, a lot of what I think I've been doing over the years is providing a basis of information and expertise that I've fully made available both in print and online.
Yeah.
And anybody that wants to take advantage of it can and should. And when I get a phone call or an email and someone says, "Oh, you know, what should I do about band accounting or this legal problem?" and I know that it's been covered and is on my website or it's been talked about, you know, in the last year or so in print, my natural reaction is a negative one. It's because that person hasn't bothered to take their 5 minutes of their time to flick through what is available.
Yeah, that makes
and I
sense.
know it's available. So I resent that, and I dislike it, and I get fairly short with people.
Yeah.
So, going back to what I was suggesting about the guitars on fire thing, because I wanted to raise it with you. Anyway, I imagine Gray Bartlett was who it was that smacked you down, did?
No, I found there was another bigger promoter in New Zealand that put rival country stars on it.
Great. Must be great.
So I'm not too sure. I was working with Gray inside the tour.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So it wasn't Gray that slapped you down?
Not that I'm aware of.
No. Okay.
No. So, but he has done another tour with country guitarists coming up, but I'll have to speak to him again and see what's up.
Sorry, I just kind of he came into my mind because I saw him just the other day, and I'd been, knowing that this was coming out, and I saw him. I thought, oh yeah, that'll be.
So I'm not too sure, but that's where some of the frustration can come in. You know? That thing of trying to create and do good for other musicians, and then have something like the two rival stars come into the small Pukekohe town. That's where it can become easy to become bitter.
Yes.
But it's also where I think one has to take the opportunity to learn from it, and to also assess, what's going on. But it was an interesting experience, put it that way. It's not something that will stop the idea, and it's not something that will stop the tour at all.
A more simple example to describe what I was hedging around is, I speak occasionally at music politics. And so I'm in a classroom in an environment where people have essentially paid money to be taught about music and the music industry, and I'm teaching a music industry class, right? And I could say, okay, how many of you read New Zealand Musician? And I might get 30% or something, a third of them putting their hand up when I know that it's there.
Yeah,
it's at reception.
It's at the door of the rock shop.
It's called, it's at reception and the entranceway and to their school, their music school. Their peers read it. It's around. But they don't read it because, presumably because they look at the list of artists in it and they go, they're all, none of those artists are relevant to me or appeal to me, so I'm not going to read about them.
Yeah.
But my take on it is, if you are learning about a business, in this case the music business, then you want to take advantage of whatever educational materials there are available to you about that business.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, there's a free magazine that is specifically about that business and its website. And you've found various stages in your life, you've obviously gone and done the research to find the right book or the right individual to guide you in the right direction. You've made that effort and got good results from it. But here are kids, young adults in an educational environment, not taking advantage of educational, specific educational opportunities, and then wondering why they're not successful.
Yeah.
Another good example, this is all very personalised, but another good example is someone getting in touch with New Zealand Musician and saying, you know, I've got to single out how do I get an article written, or along, you know, a comment along those lines. Inevitably, what that tells me is that they don't read the magazine at all. Because if they had read the magazine, they would have a sense that we tend to write about people who are releasing EPs and or albums.
Mm-hmm.
And then every once in a while someone will contact us and say, hi, you know, our band's doing this and this. How do we, you know, is there any chance of getting coverage in the Fresh Talent section, which is our magazine's artist brief?
Yeah.
It's where we, as its name suggests, it's where we write
It's
it
good
out.
too. It's a good, I show my students, it's a good one to check out. If you're moaning about what's on TV, well, don't look on TV, you know.
Cool.
And it's a good way to discover your new band.
So that's our mechanism to write about new bands who aren't necessarily doing an EP or an album, but you know, certainly it's their first one, and it's
So Fresh Talent is the name of it, just for people that don't know?
Yeah. So when someone name checks that in contacting us, I know they read the magazine.
Yeah.
And I know they've paid some attention. When someone, as most, the majority do, express no innate understanding of the magazine, then I know that they probably don't read it. And all that's happened is that they've got to a point in their lives where they think, oh shit, I need to get... It extracts some publicity out of this, you know, and maybe they've, you know, gone online or they've asked their friends and their friends said, oh, you know, try this and this and this. And I don't know, personally I don't think I'd do that. I think, as I said to you before, I would do some research.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And that's the surprising thing about the 30%. I mean, it's not hard just to pick up the mag. You know, it's a great thing and it's there on offer. But yeah, I mean, that applies to anything, doesn't it? Do your research, just have a look, get educated. If you want people to know about your band, well, how about you take the time and, you know, look up some of their stuff.
Yeah, and that ties back to the question that you asked earlier on about, you know, cross-pollination of genres and stuff. And that's
appreciate it.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was talking about.
Awesome. As well as this is something I'm personally interested in too. Well, I'm interested in all these questions, but as well as owning the mag, you were chairman of the New Zealand Music Commission for a while. Just tell us about your time in that. It's a great organisation.
Thank you. So it was set up under the Helen Clark government out of an arts funding package that she announced, and it probably was, well, I think on reflection it was quite directionless in its at its origins. It sought to do the best for as wide a range of music and musicians as possible by having a really big board of directors, of trustees, and of a very broad mandate to deliver, and nowhere near enough money to deliver on a broad platform.
Yeah.
And it turned out that the board was too big and therefore too unwieldy, because everybody wanted their little their area of interest to be met, and you just can't do that. You can't do that. It is
pulling it in too many different
it was being pulled in two different,
not going anywhere,
and people were getting dissatisfied. So I was asked to come in, and my first connection to it was being asked to chair the board, and the board was at that point strongly needing to be redirected, and so I spent some years in that role doing that, and then I had the opportunity once the government was more, or at least the funding agency, which was the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, was more comfortable with the organisation's success and delivery systems. We had the opportunity to look at an offshore funding scheme, which is subsequently has become subsequently known as the Outward Sound scheme, which might, in another situation, not have happened, or two, been delivered through another agency, Creative New Zealand, Entered on Air, or whatever, but because by then the Music Commission was robust and well respected, we got to have that access to that money and that role. So that was certainly the highlight of my time as chair, because I brought that scheme into existence.
It's brilliant,
and it's been very successful. Yeah.
Just to back up just for a second, with the Ministry of Arts and Cultural Heritage, what was the testing ground like for that, or is there a certain amount of push and pull you have to do with something to get an initiative through?
I think it's very hard to figure from the outside what pressures there are on a government funded organisation.
Yeah,
but they have been growing year on year on year, and 10 years ago, when I first became associated with the Music Commission, I guess the question was, is this organisation actually delivering anything for the $1.5 million or whatever that is being channelled into it?
Yeah.
The industry, there seems to be a lot of dissatisfaction being expressed by people in the industry, or whatever, So they were looking to turn that situation around so that there would be satisfaction expressed within the industry that the Music Commission is delivering something tangible and worthwhile for the money. And once they had that sense, then they were prepared to look at further funding through that organisation.
That goes back to that sense of expectancy that we were talking about before. Really, that can happen quite strongly to the government bodies and that too.
Yeah.
In the end, they're really serving people, but the public, I think, a lot of the time don't realise that they don't need to be there. Of course, there's some inside things that go on, but they don't need to be there, do they?
No.
They're the same as any funding body, any government organisation, anything like the New Zealand Music Commission. They don't need to be there in the end.
Yeah.
Quick, grab a glass of
water. Sure. Sure. What's I say? So, and there is an argument about the merits of pop music or popular music, over the more traditional, traditional music. And obviously, symphony orchestras and so on are funded, and that makes sense from a cultural perspective. Why should pop musicians be funded? So that argument had to be won. Yeah. And continues to be needed to be won, because there is again, you can argue that music in the popular realm has the opportunity of making money, whereas music in the classical or the ethnic or whatever other realms has less opportunity, i.e., chart success and therefore.
Yeah.
But I think the intention of the Music Commission is to make it easier and provide information and resources that will allow popular New Zealand music to do better than it does currently. And that's as much as you can reasonably expect. It can't create the music, and nor can Entered on Air create the music. It can simply provide a means for that music to be more widely exposed.
Yeah, and I guess your approach just relating it to musicians that are starting out as well, just to keep it so that people at all levels can understand it, or all different stages and areas. Your approach in dealing with a government organisation or similar when you're trying to get something put across, I guess you'd have to keep calm. You can't just get too emotionally, you have to respect if ideas get rejected, and you wouldn't give up on an idea, but you have to just relax to a point, assess the situation, but keep calmly kind of pushing or not pushing your idea on the organisation, but
are you saying from a musician in the way they deal with?
I'm just trying to relate it for someone that's say, just a muso and not into all these different organisations.
No, I think the trick is, again, it's all these things are resources. They are services and resources and means to an end. They are not the answer. The answer is the music.
Yeah.
And the product is the music. So all that Creative New Zealand, NZ On Air, and the Music Commission, and whoever else can do is Music Commission, and New Zealand Musician can do is provide opportunity, information, resources, opportunities, exposure, encouragement, information about the best way to go about whatever aspect of your music career it is that you're interested in at that moment.
Yeah.
And it's up to you as a musician and or manager to take advantage of that information. It's certainly wrong to think that anyone will or should do that work for you, but equally it's wrong to ignore what services and information are out there and available to you, because that's wasting your time and ignoring the good work of large number of others. I just need to grab that phone.
No worries.
Hello, who's speaking? Hello? No, there is no Mrs. Johnson actually. I think you might be wrong about that.
It's a beauty.
Yeah, so that's probably the most succinct way of putting it, I think. We're blessed that we have so many of these resources, and they are staffed with fantastic people who have the musicians' best interests at very much at heart.
Yeah.
So to ignore them is stupid and rude. To abuse them is even worse. But it's certainly foolish to not take advantage of them. So the intersection of a musician with an organisation like the Music Commission might be an email or a phone call saying, "Hi, this is where I'm at, and I'm wanting to learn or achieve this in the next 6 months, and this is how I'm thinking of going about it." It's a terrible example, but it's about
that's what you're saying.
It's about seeking help in a channeled way. There are things like the Music Commission, by way of example, has a free law line. So if you took the time to go onto the Music Commission's website, you would find a banner ad or whatever promoting that service. So it's a free facility where musicians can ring up and speak to a highly respected music lawyer, and seek their advice for free, as opposed to $200 an hour or whatever it is that they charge. you know, and seems to me that that is a service that should be oversubscribed weekly. It should never be anything less than fully subscribed. You know, that fully taken up.
Yeah. In other words, people need to really use their initiative a bit. I mean, that's something similar. I was talking to you before about that book that I'm releasing, Use Your Buzz to Play the Guitar. And one of the things I say in that is, if you don't know what a word means, such as a double stop, which is just when you play guitar and you play two notes at once, use your initiative and look it up. You know, don't just cry about the fact that you don't know what they're talking about. And it's exactly the same thing. You know?
No, initiative's very, very much. It's a good word.
There's one of the speakers I listened to, that Jim Rohn, is really great, and he says you have to work on yourself more than you work on your job. And I think that's a great way of putting it. You know, if you can't just sit there and complain, well, this isn't working, or I'm going here 24 hours a day, and you have to work on all the stuff inside. You know? So, as great as those organisations like the Commission are, and they are, I love them. Not recently, years ago, but joined APRA and the MMF and IMNZ.
Good.
And they're just, I can't say enough about them, coming from a struggling teen muso, doing what we were talking about before, the partying and the why isn't this going, and having the passion but not quite the going about it the right way. So to go from that into putting all that crap aside, cluing myself up, joining these organisations and actually finding a little bit of help. Which is not someone like myself, I don't ask to hold anyone's hand, but everyone needs a little bit of help from time to time. Now these organisations are great, but they can be a bit intimidating for someone starting out.
Right.
And it can be easy for someone, say, in the organisation to maybe forget how intimidating that is.
Right. I hear you.
So what would you say to someone that's maybe not experienced with these, say, with the MMF and IMZ and the Commission?
That's interesting. That is interesting. Then I think, I don't know the answer to that. I think, the first answer is you clearly can do a lot of that learning online. So, it's quite simple to find out what organisations are out there. And then to go to their websites and do whatever reading you can do and ascertain from those websites. And without wanting to focus this on the Music Commission, but one of the things that their website has is a whole series of filmed interviews with people, which are simply brilliant.
Yeah,
they're just a great resource. And so if reading, if your reading comprehension is limited, or your ability to focus on the written word is not great, then you can watch a podcast basically, a video.
It's a good place to start too, because it's our umbrella organisation for the other organisations. So
yes, correct.
It's a good place to start.
It's the organisation that funds those two, the IMNZ and the MMF. So, there will be other similar resources. There'll be international, available videos and websites that can give you insight and teach you, give you information and insight about the way forward.
There's no excuse now with the internet.
There seriously is no excuse. No, but I do understand intimidation, and I think people will always come unstuck with authority or a higher entity or whatever, if they approach that without knowing explicitly why it is that they are approaching that and what they are expecting to get as a result. When you get the phone call that's really the person hasn't figured out what the question is, and you spend 5 minutes talking to them trying to ascertain what their question is, then they're out of whack. They're not. It's not appropriate. When you get the phone call and it goes straight into a specific question. I'm doing this and I'm wanting to achieve that. How do I get that? Who do I communicate with to do it? Where do I go looking for it? Then you can give that answer and you can carry on and have a dialogue.
One of the first things I ask my guitar students is, why are you learning? If they don't know it, who else is going to know it for them? You know, but some of them honestly probably don't know, but it's just that but they just haven't thought about it.
Yeah.
You know, but if you just have a think and get those things clear, get the why clear, then it kind of supports everything else, and it especially supports it when things turn to shit, as they will from time to time.
Yeah, it's true.
You know. This was kind of touching on things that we've said. Do you feel that people in New Zealand can give criticism of the industry? And this goes, I think, just thinking of it now, this goes to what you were saying about it's all in the approach and why they're doing it. But just for perhaps some artists that are a bit, what would you call it? Not disenchanted, but a bit confused or annoyed at the way they perceive things to be going on. Do you think that they can give criticism of the mainstream industry or some of the bigger players without being ostracised?
Yes. Yeah, but I mean, hey, again, the internet, everyone can be a critic or a mouthpiece,
keyboard warrior,
or a blogger, or keyboard warrior. Yes, without giving specific examples, there's no doubt that I've seen individuals who have criticised mainstream music organisations subsequently receiving funding or receiving whatever support or embraced through those same organisations. So yeah, of course you can.
Yep.
But I don't think anybody really admires ill-informed criticism.
No.
Best mates do, and drunken buddies do, but otherwise nobody really does.
Yep. And it usually doesn't do too much to actually rectify any situations if they need changing anyway. Okay. In saying that, is there something that you would like to see improved or changed in the New Zealand industry?
I don't know that it's the industry as such, but I would really like to see individuals taking advantage of the existing knowledge more. And again, we've touched on this already. I would just like to think that as we go further forward, that people, be they musicians or management focused or whatever, might increasingly take advantage of the existing pool of knowledge and be unafraid to ask, to ask those that will have that knowledge to help them accelerate. Good example sits with the Outward Sound funding scheme that the Music Commission runs. So it's a scheme about providing small amounts of money for artists wanting to take their music to specific markets overseas. The process is that you fill in an application form and that on a funding round, and that gets evaluated against whoever else has submitted funding in that round, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a department manager and his assistant who oversee the acceptance of those applications and etc.
Go through the process.
Yeah, go through the process. Now, both of those individuals are incredibly welcoming of bands and band managers and whoever else coming into the office and discussing projects with them. But I know that there are any number of applications that come in without any face-to-face discussions also taking place. And it seems to me that if you're applying for $10,000 of funding from an organisation, one, you'd think it was a courtesy to go and talk to the individuals in charge of that department and that funding, a courtesy. And two, you'd think it would be very intelligent to go and see them and make sure that what you're providing them in terms of your application is what they want, and that indeed your application or the reason for your application is a valid one in their eyes, because otherwise you are wasting your time.
Yeah.
But I don't know the percentage because I've never asked that question, but for sure a percentage of applicants are done cold and without that kind of a meeting and that kind of discussion. And I know that if that discussion was held, those people would get fantastic advice, and it would help them. It might not help them, it might not mean they get the $10,000.
I'm trying not to laugh at it. It's such a good point. It's an obvious thing, and I don't know whether it probably isn't because of the internet and technology and everything, but people seem to be doing that more and more.
Yes.
I think if you keep that humanity of just going and actually talking. But I think there's different elements that come into it, like the intimidation and things like that. There's always, nothing's always black and white, but you got to, if that humanity stays there, I mean, it's
And in light of that comment, music, successful music is a very public process, isn't it? You don't become a successful musician without putting yourself right out there in front of the public. Even if you're not a live performer, your music's out there for the criticism and so on.
Yep.
So if you are expecting your government to give you money to pursue your craft, then it's reasonable that you would expect those responsible to it's reasonable that those responsible for giving that funding might need to know that you are capable of delivering on it.
Will contribute something.
Yeah. And that means that you can hold a conversation with somebody and look them in the eye, that you know when to wear a clean pair of sneakers instead of a filthy pair of sneakers.
Harder for some of us than others, but yeah.
Yeah. But it's all, there are some basics. A really good example, again drawn from my music commission years, is that there is a pool of knowledge which the providers make available to others. So, good example, a manager of an already international Kiwi band will have been in the offices of any number of promoters, agents, lawyers, managers in London, let's say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And another fresh Kiwi band might want to go off to London and meet in their similar music genre, so they might want to go and meet with a label or a promoter. Now, there's no reason if those individuals don't understand how to be polite, how to be well mannered, how to be well groomed, how to be punctual, etc., etc., and are given a valuable name, a valuable lawyer connection or a valuable agent's collection, and they go over there and abuse it by being late, by being dishevelled, by being disorganised, by being illiterate or whatever, then they might well ruin that connectivity, that connection for anybody else in the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
So, you've got a high-powered lawyer whose time is very valuable,
yeah,
and they might do a favour for their mate, their New Zealand friend. you really want me to see this band? I don't know, I haven't really got time. Please see them.
Yeah, so they're on the fence about it, and then they'll do it because.
And then the band turns up 15 minutes late.
Yeah, and it screws it for
it. Yeah. And that favour can't be asked for again.
Yeah.
And that does happen, and it's a reason again why anybody that's providing funding has a reasonable right to expect a degree of competence and to be able to see that degree of competence, and that includes not being afraid of picking up the phone and having a conversation, or not being afraid of face-to-face meetings, because if you're afraid of a face-to-face meeting within New Zealand, then there's no reason to assume that you're going to be confident having a face-to-face meeting outside of New Zealand.
No, definitely not. This is probably something we've talked about too, but for aspiring musos, sometimes it can be easy to fall into a trap of just criticising the industry without realising the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes. And yeah, I mean, we have kind of gone over this, but just because the band doesn't get funding or doesn't get in a mag, it doesn't mean that all of the industry is bad. So just if we could sum that up of what you'd tell maybe a musician that's losing a bit of faith in what they do because of negative responses from people in the business side, would you have any advice maybe for a musician?
I think if anyone is getting negative responses, then they are probably earning that.
Yep.
If they're getting no response, then they just simply have to be accepting that that is the norm. That it's that the music industry is something of a funnel whereby there are thousands entering the funnel, and only ones and twos can dribble out the bottom with success.
Yeah.
And in between, those thousands are being squished down to hundreds, 50s, 10s, and finally down to the 1 and 2. And there just simply isn't time for anybody within the process to deal with the thousands. Everybody at every stage of the a musician's career is time poor and is looking for ways to do their job but not waste their time. And we all have filters.
Yep.
We have them privately and we have them commercially in our business dealings. So we all use them. And what, certainly what's good music to one person is not appropriate, or good music to the next person. So again, horses of courses is a good one. If you're a hip hop artist and you're bothering people, and you're bothering a pop magazine by way of example, or a pop music writer, or a
common one, radio station,
or a pop radio station
everywhere.
Yeah, then you're wasting those people's time, and you're only going to get their back up. But if you're targeting and you've done your research, then you're not going to upset anybody.
Working on yourself.
You're not going to get a negative reaction. You might get turned down, but you ain't going to get a negative reaction.
Yeah, no, that's some very good advice.
I think people forget, musicians forget, by virtue of the fact they're artists and typically they're young, it's not forgetting as such, they haven't yet learned that people who go to work for a living typically work hard in those hours that they're at their office, and unfortunately, email being what it is, receive far more calls on their time than they have time available to respond, and which is to say that whoever it is that you're emailing to looking for help or assistance or information from is receiving too many emails to be able to respond to them all. And sometimes it might take 2 or 3 for you to cut through, or for you to take a more focused and well-researched approach in order to achieve the cut through that you want to.
Yeah, there's been a big kind of theme running through with what you've been saying this whole time, which is do your research. You know, and yeah, really just be clued up about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yes.
I'm sure too, in saying that with your own career, there's been some high points and low points.
Yep.
So, can you just fill us in maybe on a couple of the rougher times or things the challenges you've faced and how you've got around those? And it doesn't have to be industry specific.
I think that there's an ongoing, if you're in business and providing a service, there's an ongoing challenge of freshening the face of that service and the nature of that service on a regular basis, so that it continues to hold appeal. And one of the greatest challenges for New Zealand musician is that it draws its revenue from the importers and distributors of musical instruments, by and large.
Yeah.
And it talks to musicians of all persuasions on the other side. So I have to convince these people over here, the distributors, that the readers of this magazine are potential buyers of their products. So if my heart were in Kiwi metal and metal and all branches of hard rock, then I could expect only to get advertising from suppliers of hard rock musical equipment, because others would pretty quickly perceive that there's nothing in there for jazz musicians, for pop musicians, for country musicians, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So all of which is helps explain the nature of New Zealand musician, which is a very broad platform of content across a wide spectrum of genres.
Yeah.
And one of the times that did become very difficult was in the rise of the keyboard musician. At a time when there was it was quite funny actually. We put King Kapisi on the cover one time, and what's this? Late 90s, is it? Mid to late 90s, and there was another organisation, a small musician-based organisation that had a newsletter, and they published a newsletter with a picture of that cover saying, "So DJ's a musician now, are they?" Effectively, Yeah. So our challenge was
same old crap.
was to the challenge then was survival. In answer to your question, because people were simply not buying guitars or drums or keyboards. The only things that they were buying were, it seemed at a retail point, were related to being a DJ.
Was this in the late 90s, the Prodigy boom, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was prior. Really, it was just sort of it was an odd time, and seriously, I was very lucky that some of our advertisers stuck with us and continued to advertise their guitars and their drums and their keyboards, because literally nobody was buying them.
Yeah.
it was dance music, was the arrival of electronic music.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's one of the low points, because I wasn't getting much. The only things you can really advertise the only product categories were mixers and turntables, and there was only 2 brands of turntables available really at that time, Technics and Newmark, and both of those brands couldn't source enough product to meet the demand, so that they weren't interested in advertising their turntables, and it was a pretty similar sort of story on the mixer side. There was more brands, but any that they could bring in, they could pretty much sell. So it was quite, so that was a challenge. I think where I started telling that story, that answering that question, was that the magazine's come out to 25 years old, which means I've been in it for close on that length of time, and I believe I'm still writing for a similar age bracket, or that the magazine is still aimed at a similar age bracket to it was when I was 25 years younger, because if it's aimed at the same readers as it had 25 years ago, then it's totally lost its way. And so you've got to, as I say, in providing a service, you've got to keep refreshing that service, because time moves on, and you've got to keep reinventing it. And that's certainly an ongoing challenge. It's not straightforward. It's not easy, and probably in the last few years, New Zealand Musician has been facing the biggest of those, as has every single other print media in the entire world, that younger people, specifically, but not exclusively, are less inclined to read anything on paper. They'd much rather read it on a computer screen.
Yeah.
And 2, they're actually disinclined to read anything. So their attention levels to the written word are markedly reduced, and their enthusiasm for anything that demands that concentration is almost evaporated. Hence the success of tweeting over emailing, because it's that much quicker,
short to the point, and it's easy to do.
As I say, right at the moment, although the magazine has got longevity on its side, that longevity comes with a serious challenge of being meaningful in a new environment, a new reader environment, which is essentially a digital environment. And that's a big one. And the other thing that we've always faced is writing about music being, I don't know, like, I should have a good metaphor, shouldn't I? Being about music is about listening, basically, not about reading. So that we've always had that challenge.
Yeah.
But I haven't strictly answered your question, but I suppose over time, one's enthusiasm waxes and wanes. The quality, there was actually, here's my answer to your question. In the early days of New Zealand Musician, there really wasn't much New Zealand music being produced. There was very, very little, and it was difficult to pretend otherwise. But my philosophy was such that I needed to pretend otherwise. I needed to convince the readers that there was lots of good stuff happening, and advertisers, there was lots of good stuff happening out there.
Yeah.
So I was very pleased when, bit by bit, the music creativity started to come out. But it took some years.
Yeah. And that, when you started, you say, and you had to convince them, was that a certain point, and probably for want of a better way of phrasing it, but you kind of had to act as if, that the music was bigger than itself?
Yep. Yep. I wanted to do album reviews, from the outset, but there were months when there might be only one album released, or two or three at the most, and that would have been too embarrassing to have only have one or three reviews to include in that issue.
Yeah.
I felt. So I didn't do album reviews until a few years later, when there was sufficient album reviews that I knew there would be at least 6 per issue, or whatever the number was. I waited until there was a guaranteed flow.
You've got to time things.
Mm.
Cool. And did you? This is totally not in here and not related, but looking back to those early days, are there any bands that stood out that might not be in the mainstream that you can think of? I know you dealt with hundreds of thousands of bands. I'm asking what band, but what's some cool shit you're listening to now?
Don't ask me that question. It's too hard.
Well, that's good. That's good. What advice? Actually, sorry, I just skipped there. But there was this thing I was wondering too: is how people, in saying that and talking about the tougher times and things like that, how can people inside and outside of the music business help with New Zealand Musician Magazine?
I'd rather leave the magazine out, because I don't think that's necessarily appropriate part of that. I think I think the best way to support New Zealand music is probably going to live performances, and there are plenty of good stories of young people taking a friend, groups of friends, where some of them have never been to a live music performance because they've been to lots of dance parties and raves and that sort of experience, but have never been to a rock and roll gig.
Yeah.
And some of them possibly have a bad experience when they do go to a rock and roll gig, but others have a fantastic experience and think, hang on, this is where I should be.
Yeah.
A DJ isn't actually, entertainment, but these people with guitars and drums and human voices are. And I think that that's where it starts. The whole. I think it's an endless chain or a circle or whatever. The sector might be circular, might be considered to be circular, but the important way in for people wanting to help is going to see live music. And a fault that musicians are guilty of in that context, still today, unfortunately, because it still happens, and certainly have been over the years that I've been around, is not delivering on the live performance, and specifically not delivering on any punctuality. For my money, bands not performing to a time frame, or venues not being prepared to give audiences a time frame for performance and enforce that amongst their performing bands is a real negative.
Yeah.
And again, we're increasingly time poor, and some of us either want to spend some time with friends or family and then go and see music, or the other way around, or go and see 2 different venues in the course of an evening to see as much music as we can on that evening. Or we might want to go and see a movie or whatever. But bands who insist on performing, on not performing to a schedule, or playing so ridiculously late at night that their audience already half asleep on their feet are really doing nobody a good service.
I mean, it comes back to that thing of, one of my pet peeves with music is just the whole buy into image thing. Image is an essential part, obviously. I mean, would Pink Floyd be Pink Floyd, standing there in suits kind of thing, but with no crazy Sid Barrett backdrop. But at the same time, I think musicians can be guilty of looking at someone like Motley Crue and going, well, that's what we're going to be, man. And then so they come to a venue, they might disrespect the sound guy. They have a J in the car park and come on late and think they're all that. And dude, you're playing at the King's Arms, which is a great venue. I love the venue, but you're playing at the King's Arms in Auckland, man. Calm down and just do what you say you're going to do and give the audience a good show rather than trying to be some stupid rock star. So I think on both the industry side, if you're working in the business at any level, reception and stuff, or if you're in a band and you're a creative type, it's just being punctual and doing what you say you're going to do and doing it for the right reasons. I mean, it comes back to that, doesn't it? With what advice would you have? And again, you say you don't want to make this like a plug for NZ Musician or anything, but what advice would you have for musos? I get students sometimes that want to work at magazines or that think they can't have a job in the music business if they can't. All they see is guitarist, producer, DJ. That's about it. But there's more
what
jobs.
What other options are there out there? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, I think those people are.
And again, it comes back to looking. But I mean, talking about specifically maybe some younger people that don't have that experience yet or don't know.
We've in recent years we've had some really good experiences of. I'll start this all again. New Zealand Musician has actually survived its time because people have volunteered their services in one way or another, specifically as writers. In some cases to actually do office work, but most of our contributors are unpaid. They're columnists and reviewers are unpaid for those services. So those people have typically contacted the magazine at a point and said, "Hi, I'm John, and I've got this. This is my history, and this is my skill set, and I'd be really interested in sharing it with your readers, if you let me." And that is a great strength of the magazine because it means that the people writing are doing it for what I consider to be the right reasons, which is sharing of their love and knowledge of music.
Yeah.
It means that we don't necessarily have the best focused set of columns or the most accurately distinct range of columns or something, but they're all from very good people, and it means that the magazine can survive because it's not paying for those services.
Yeah.
In addition to that, internships have become, or that word has become popularised within New Zealand in recent years. It certainly wasn't a widely used term in years gone by, but in the last 4 or 5 years, internships have become quite commonplace in this country, and New Zealand Musicians had some great experiences of individuals who have essentially knocked on our door and introduced themselves and said, "Hi, I'm a musician, love the magazine, would love to be able to help you do something if there is something that I can help you do."
Yeah.
And that might turn out to be a couple of hours a week within the office, or it might turn out doing the odd CD review, or it might turn out to be whatever, but it certainly inevitably leads them on to a greater involvement within the music industry, and those are, again, they're people who are showing initiative, willingness, enthusiasm, ability to communicate, and the kind of confidence that you look for in an employee.
And you think, say, I'm talking specifically maybe for, say, someone that's in high school,
Mhm.
college, I'll call it high school so everyone knows what I'm talking. And they might contact you and say something similar. They might get a rejection of, or just a no, we don't need your services at the moment. Or that. I think a big part for them, a big thing that might be useful for them to remember, is not to start going if you don't need them to work for you at the moment. For them not to be angry at the magazine or disappointed, which can happen. It's just an emotional response, especially with people that have not. And I don't want to, antagonise any teenagers out there, but people that have not developed that kind of emotional control.
Well, yes, yeah. And another thing within that context, Ryan, is people's perceptions of things, and the younger you are, the less worldly you are, the less exposure you've had to different environments, and I think that a lot of people communicating with the magazine assume that we have quite a big staff. I don't know whether they assume it's 6, 10, 16, 26, 40, I don't know what they think, but they certainly think more than the 2.5 people that run this magazine.
Yeah.
They certainly think that. And therefore, if they're told that there are no jobs, they assume that, they might take the wrong assumption that, well, there must be an opportunity in there. But in fact, this is run very, 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 very lean.
Yeah.
And so, had they, instead of doing that by email or phone call, had they somehow or other contrived to come in the office door, they would have seen how big the office is and gone, oh, actually there isn't room for me, or or whatever.
And that's a good thing on your part too. I mean, for to have not so much staff, but people think that it's massive.
I agree. It's it's kind of flattering in its odd way, and it is, but it is a reality, and it's not dissimilar in the newspaper situation. If you contacted the Herald and said, I want to do film reviews or CD reviews or whatever else it is that you communicate with, again, when it comes down to it, that entertainment section is a small number of people. It's 4 people. It's a big newspaper, but the department is a small department in a big newspaper, and it's the way it is, and we all work hard. But certainly, I think that it would probably not matter what you're talking about in New Zealand society if someone was to send send out an email that was, 1, articulate enough, and 2, personalised, and 3, accurate enough in its request for assistance, help, information, resource, then they would get that answer. I get a lot of high school students who have been given a coursework by their teacher to do some sort of commentary on the New Zealand music scene, right? And so they email me saying, this is my assignment, can you answer the following 3 questions, would that be all right? Okay. I got one from a guy that was exactly that, that assignment, and it was, what's the history of New Zealand musician, or something like that, and all that information was on the website.
Yeah.
He hadn't even been to the website.
Hadn't even had a look.
And therefore, he either got ignored or got a quick email flick across the face. For that very reason. Whereas 4 out of 5 will say, I've had a good look on your website, and there's a few other questions that I'd like you to answer. And they will get it, and it would be the same, I think, in any walk of life. If the questions are, as I say, articulate and considered, as opposed to receiving an email that has got a screen of information, and at the top is "Dear," and someone's name has been inserted, against the standard mantra of questions, which is all too common.
Yeah, little things too, like getting your name right. I mean, I went to one of the funding bodies in New Zealand, and they came back and called me Robbie, and I thought that was a bit unfortunate. That was when I wrote quite a big letter of the tour that I was putting on and everything I did and what I was trying to do to help. And
Not good.
And it's this is coming from but I mean. That's some good advice. So really, just for musicians out there, if they can just be courteous, don't just want, and do a bit of
absolutely. It was a very cool young guy. Contacted me saying, "Hi, I'm Doug. I'm 15 years old, but I just started my own music blog, and I'm in a band. And I just wonder if you wouldn't mind going to the blog and having a read of it and giving me any writing advice that you'd like to." And that was it. That was really it. That was just.